Welcome to the Breaking Up with Naive podcast, where it's not heartbreak, it's a rebrand. I'm your host, Dr. Becky Rollerson. This is a place where my friends and I share our stories of heartbreak in life, combined with our testimonies of how being a Christ follower led us to surviving the heartbreak and to rebuilding healthy lives. While the stories shared here are relevant and true, it is important to note that I am not a trained counselor, not a trained mental health counselor, nor someone who assesses mental health. If you feel that you need help in that area, I encourage you to please seek medical guidance. The testimonies shared here on this podcast are intended to encourage and inspire other women to be less naive when it comes to Satan's ugly ways. With that, welcome to today's episode of Breaking Up with Naive. Everybody, and welcome to this episode of Breaking Up with Naive. So this episode is going to be a little different. It does not necessarily set the tone for what the majority of my episodes are going to be. That was more what you found in episode 1. But I felt like it was really important for me to explain the foundation of this podcast and where it was born from. So I'm going to be sharing some personal stories in the next little bit to tell you how this podcast came about. People have asked me all throughout my life through various situations about, you should be a storyteller, you should write a book, you should tell people about these things. And I was very hesitant to do that, mostly because who wants to hear my story? There's so many stories out there that are way worse than mine, and there are some great storytellers out there. So I really thought nobody wants to hear my story. But I went through a pretty big heartbreak recently in the last 6 months, and that was the catalyst that finally said, you know what, I'm going to share, but I don't want this to be about me. I want this to be about other women, and men too, but women is where I identify with most, that have been through heartbreak, that want to share their stories. And the reason for that is that I have struggled with loneliness in my life ever since I was a child, since I can remember. Now, that doesn't mean I was lonely. That doesn't mean I didn't have people around me in a support system. But the devil was great at continuously telling me the lie that I was by myself and that I was lonely, and then would fill my head with all kinds of other lies. So when I say that we're breaking up with Naive, while I originally named this podcast that in reference to being naive to relationship struggles, it has really developed into, no, we are naive to Satan's lies. Satan is great at telling lies, and we can sometimes be really naive to those. So it's heartbreak that we bring on ourselves, and that's why we have to rebrand ourselves in Christ, His Word, His people, His church, and I really strongly believe that. So this entire podcast is more about breaking up with naivety of Satan's lies and rebranding yourself in Christ. And so I'm going to share a little bit of my story so you can see where I'm coming from on this. Again, people have gone through worse heartbreaks than what I've been through. I do believe perception is reality. For me, my heartbreaks have been very real, and I have experienced them, and I have heard from them, I have felt them, and I have healed from most of them. But that doesn't mean that somebody else's heartbreak isn't a different kind of heartbreak and just as relevant, and if not more so relevant than mine. So I will start with my family life. I grew up in a small town in the panhandle of Florida, and great town, raised by some wonderful people, typical small town America. And we had homecoming parades for our public school system, of which I attended. My dad was a high school teacher, so I was definitely a part of the public school system. I found myself with lots of academic success in the classroom. Things came fairly easy for me. So I was able to perform well in school, which led to a lot of other things like respect by a lot of my teachers and peers. I was given a lot of responsibility as I was growing up because my teachers and administrators in the school district and community could trust me with things. But that didn't mean that I didn't feel very lonely. I did have 2 younger sisters that are amazing and a wonderful mom and dad that were married until my dad passed away in 2019. I grew up attending the Baptist church there in that small town where I was very much fed spiritually and I was invested in as a young child of God, learning about what the Lord had done for me in giving us Christ and how I needed to rely on Him in my life. I had some great youth pastors over that time as well. There were just so many people that invested in me. I did not go to church as a family, really, though. My mom and dad would come in and come out of church as time went on, but they always encouraged us to go. And I do believe that when I was saved at 7 years old at a vacation Bible school, the Lord meant to speak to me and give me some significant responsibility. However, as a young believer and a young child, I think my view was very different then than it is today, all these years later. I continued to go on through high school. I will be honest, I did not date much. Some people said that they were scared to ask me out because they were scared of my dad. He was known as a disciplinarian there at the local high school. Having said that, I don't know. I just did not date a lot. And for that reason, I watched my friends date. I watched my friends go to a lot of social functions. I watched my friends be very involved and have guy friends. But I also had a great group of female friends that were my core group. And I am so fortunate that even today we are a core group of childhood friends. And one of those is going to be a part of this story as you continue to listen to this today. But I got out of high school. I had one goal, and that goal was to attend one of the major universities in our state. And I wanted to go there, and I wanted to be a freshman there. And the Lord saw fit for that opportunity to open for me, and I was able to do that. But before I did that, I became a state officer for a youth organization I had been a part of in high school, where I really had the opportunity to meet tons of people from across the state and also network with those people because I ended up at college with these people. And through that, because there was people that I met my future husband that way. And we ended up dating before I officially became a student at the university. Once I was a student, I joined a sorority. He was in a fraternity. We definitely had a great college experience. When we started dating, he had been through a major heartbreak. He had dated someone for 3 years who had left him pretty heartbroken, and he really struggled with that. He wasn't really healed yet, if you ask me, now in retrospect. But in the moment, not having a lot of dating experience, and I really liked his family, and my family liked him, and he liked my family, and things were just progressing because that's what you do when you're at that age, and you're watching all of your friends date, and then one couple by couple by couple, people start getting married. And we dated 4 years, and we did have a wedding. And I just remember thinking that I was in love and everything was going as planned. I had found a husband. Our next step was to build a life together and have children together. And we were fortunate enough after a few years of being married and trying that the Lord blessed us with our son. And we had spent quite a bit of time waiting for his arrival. So we were really surprised a few months later. He was only 7 months old when we found out that we were expecting our daughter, and what a blessing she was as well. And during that time, we actually lived in a small town outside of Gainesville that we really fell in love with and met so many wonderful people, and were involved in a church there before we had children. had some wonderful friends, a great friend group that we spent a lot of time with. But then we moved, and we moved for his job. He took a different position in a different place. And at that point, the decision was made for me to be a stay-at-home mom. Now, this was a hard transition for me. I had been given leadership responsibilities since I was a child. It's all I knew was to help lead in different areas and to, when I say lead, serve. And I would serve as an officer of this. And all through college, I served in various roles and was given several accolades and positional leadership positions. So all of these things is what I was used to. And then all of the sudden, I'm a stay-at-home mom with 2 babies that are under the age of 2. And I had to really learn how to be a mom and balance things in a different way. And it was really hard for me to see him go to work and to really try to succeed at a career. And I felt like I had completely lost myself and turned into this other person. And during those years, while they were beautiful in one way, it was also a struggle. We were involved in a church in that town. I took on leadership roles in the church, women leadership roles, but then it became apparent that we needed to be leaders as a couple. And I don't believe that he had the training to be able to do that. And I pushed him into that. I trained him to do that. And our marriage really started to struggle. I remember admitting to some fellow people in the church that our marriage was struggling. And I was encouraged to speak with my husband about it and to be open and honest with him. And I finally got the courage to be able to do that. And it did not go well. And the reason I believe it didn't go well is because Satan was lying to him and bringing up all of his old hurt from that previous relationship and relationships before I came into his life. And that reaction basically was the catalyst that took us downhill and ultimately led to our divorce. I truly believe that. And things started getting really bad. He was at work or enjoying his hobbies all the time. I was taking the kids 7 days a week, mostly by myself. Every once in a while, we would try to enjoy a date night. It just wasn't enough. And it got to a point where I was struggling so bad. And I knew that the happiest years of our marriage had been back in this small town that we had lived in north of us. And I said, I'm moving back. And I did. And I just took a job teaching high school. And it was a hard transition for him because I basically took control at that point. Again, Satan was telling me, you need to do this. You need to go back to work. And I did. And I do believe that the Lord used me to really work with a lot of high school students during that couple of years. And then I was able to get a job at the university that I had graduated from. And I was so excited to be able to go back there and work again. But the whole time this is happening, my husband is turning into what I was and being very unhappy. We were never happy at the same time. And he was very unhappy in the role and the position of work that he had to get back in the North Florida area to be able to move back with us. I was frustrated because he was unhappy all the time. And then another door opened for me. And that door was the opportunity to be an elected official in this small town. And we had someone who passed away during her term of office, and it opened up an opportunity for me to be appointed. And I truly believe that the Lord aligned all the things that needed to happen and put them in alignment for me to be able to be the person that was appointed to that office. And I really felt like God had called me to serve in that area. Unfortunately, I was only going to be in that position for a year before I had to run a political campaign. So the summer of 2012 rolls around, and I am running a political campaign to try to stay in office, in this particular office. And there was another person that was running for a different office, and he had grown up here. And the lies that I was naive to at that point from Satan was that all of a sudden I was the new cool kid in town. I was a young, apparently attractive. I wouldn't have called myself that in the moment, but I did have people telling me that I was young, attractive, and a go-getter. And this other person running for office had grown up in this small town, had a lot of family connections, and pursued me in a way that I had not been pursued by another man. And this person knew that I was married. I knew that he was married. And I had not a thought in the world about it until all of a sudden, a little string of text messages with some really nice compliments that I had not heard from my husband in a very long time started to be sent to me. And it made me feel good. And Satan said, "Hey, Becky, you haven't heard these nice words from a man in a long time." And it gave me what I consider a dopamine hit, where it made me feel good and it made me happy. And I wanted more of that. And I allowed that to happen in my life. And by allowing that to happen, I allowed that sin to overtake my marriage. And I made one of the biggest sinful mistakes that completely changed my life from that point on. And I had an affair with this person. And the Lord very quickly convicted me of this sin. However, I don't know that I really understood the Lord's grace and mercy, because I went through a depression and a just outright terrible time in my life after that. My husband did find out, which is ultimately how the 2.5-month affair ended. The person I had had an affair with found out that my husband knew and completely ghosted me, ran, left it for me to solve the issues in my house. And, there were a lot of things going on, and I'm telling this story from my perspective. There were things that were happening on my husband's end of things too that I will not tell because it's not my story to tell. But I'm telling you that I messed up. I literally felt like David, who had just had an affair with Bathsheba and went into complete mourning. And I knew that the consequences were coming, and the consequences did come. I did win the election that particular fall. I was a public official in a small town and was going through the worst marriage issues that I never dreamed was going to be a part of my life. I knew that things weren't great, but, I didn't think that things were wonderful with any married couple with young children. It's just a lot of stress on a young family. But as time went on, our marriage got worse and worse. He could not trust me again. I can't say that I blame him for not wanting to trust me again. Things continued to develop, got worse and worse. And it hit a point where things had become so toxic that I decided that the only way that we were going to make it out of this was for me to move out and give us some time of separation. So I was able to get a rental house. Mind you, I was working part-time at the university. I did not have a full-time job. I did not have benefits. I didn't even make enough money to cover my rent, but I just decided I was going to have to do this for my sake and to be able to get out. I lived off of that small income. I lived off of anything I could find that would bring joy to my life. Sometimes that was alcoholic outing with friends. Sometimes that was in the privacy of my bedroom. Sometimes that was going and enjoying something that was out of my control. But I will tell you that I felt like every time I walked out of my house, I had to put on a show for my community and be this person that I was dying inside. And in the meantime, ultimately, my husband, now my ex-husband, did file for divorce. He did meet somebody else, and I went through that process of grieving the fact that he had literally left me for somebody else, even though I knew I had my own sins I was carrying around. At that point, I went into such a depression that I considered suicide. I considered taking my life. I did not know how I was going to come out of this. And truthfully, there were a few people that God placed in my life to encourage me, support me, and watch out for me to make sure that I did not do that. It was a very, very painful time in my life, but it was also a time when I dug deep into the foundation of my spiritual roots and found a conversation with the Lord that I'd never had before. I had driven out to a lake that is a lake that doesn't have really any houses on it, but is a beautiful spot and serene, and people go there to fish a lot. And I was sitting out there by myself with a loaded gun and a 6-pack of beer. And I just remember calling out to the Lord and telling him that something had to change. And I kid you not, a storm, an actual thunderstorm, came out of absolutely nowhere. It was bright, it was sunny, it was still, and a storm came, and that lake was whitecapping in the matter of seconds. And it distracted me. And it distracted me from my thoughts, and I thought, where did this storm come from? It's whitecapping out there. And I just sat there in my vehicle and watched. And at that point, I heard the Lord's voice say to me, I am not done with you here, Becky. I am not done with you here. And you will find peace in me. And as soon as those words were heard through my ears, that storm was gone, and it was sunny again, and that lake was just like glass. And I know that there are people out there who are going to think I'm making this story up, but I can assure you that the Lord knows I'm telling the truth. And it was in that moment that I said, okay, I still don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm still hurting, but okay, I heard you. So over the period of the next several months, my childhood best friend got really sick with the kidney disease that she had, and it got worse and worse, and it actually hit a point where she had to have a kidney transplant. And when she called to tell me this, somehow again the Lord spoke and told me, Becky, you're going to be the person that gives her a kidney. And I ended up being her perfect match. And there's a lot of details to that story that I might go into in a later episode, but I ended up being the perfect match for her. And when the nephrologist came out to speak to us during the pre-surgery meetings, he said to us, there are not two people that I have had that are as close as a match as you are, including biological siblings. And at that moment, I looked at Candy and I said, this is a God thing. He gave me this purpose. And so she always would say that I saved her life. But I would very much say that she, in that situation, saved my life just as much. So that surgery took place in 2015. Shortly thereafter, my divorce was finalized. And at that point, I was very lonely. And in that loneliness, I met somebody who I knew who his family was, and I knew he was from a pretty prominent family in the community, also from a very political family in the community. And I thought, well, he's going to get this, and he's going to get me being in a public position and having to figure things out. And we dated. We dated for 5 years. There was a lot of on and off in that 5 years. His 2 children and my 2 children spent some time together. That turned out to not necessarily be a strong aspect of our relationship. This was a person that as I was dating him, I felt the Lord telling me that it was not the right relationship for me. I won't say a lot of the things that I might think, but I will say that I don't believe that this person was spiritually where I was at. I don't think we were equally yoked. He had been through his own share of hurt in various ways and for various reasons. And that relationship, the Lord ended that because I could not let go. I could not let go, even though the Lord was telling me this is not right, and things were happening that were showing me that this was not a relationship that I needed to be in or that I needed to continue to pursue. But I could not let go. I was wanting to control it because I didn't want to be lonely. And the Lord allowed something to happen there that ended that relationship. And when that happened, I went into another heartbreak. I will say that I never was suicidal again, but I definitely went into another heartbreak that was physical, it was emotional, and it took me a really long time to work past that. I continued to allow Satan's lies to infiltrate my mind during that time. There were so many things that happened to me during that time. I dated other people. I went on one night dates. I took off in all kinds of directions. I pursued things that were not godly. I also, at the same time, was pursuing things that were godly. And so I know that the Lord was working on me that whole time, and He loved me through all of those sinful moments. He loved me through all of those moments. And I waited a long time. I eventually went almost 2 years before I dated again. I decided to not date for a very long time. I had been on apps. I had done all the things. And I'd actually gone on some dates with some very nice gentlemen, but I knew that I was not ready to be in a relationship again, and I was not healed. And I waited and I waited. And my childhood bestie that I had donated my kidney to was beside me in all of it, as well as some of my other childhood friends, as well as other local friends and lifelong friends. So I had a really good support group, sometimes probably didn't realize how much so. But ultimately, the time came where I decided that maybe I would start dating again. And to my surprise and to my devastation, the Lord took my childhood best friend from this earth and called her home to Him. And that was not a heartbreak that I was prepared for, because she was my person. She was the person that had been with me through all of this, and was the person who would tell me when I was in the wrong and would hold me accountable and also love me anyway, and was the person that I felt like the Lord had put in my life to love me through all of the situations that I had messed up, and the situations and successes that I had got right in the Lord. And that happened, and I was devastated, and I was physically ill. And another person came into my life 2 weeks after she passed away, and it was unexpected, and it was beautiful in the moment, and I truly believe that the Lord had placed him in my life. And we dated for a solid 9 months after that, and we had a situation happen where he walked away from our relationship for a short period of time, but came back. But he didn't come back in the same way that he had been in it before, but he was there. And we were still dating and still seeing each other in a little different way. And I was very careful because I did not want to put pressure on him. And I really thought that he was in it for the long haul and just needed some time to process some things, because I knew he had come into our relationship with some previous hurt. And I had set some boundaries after that first 9 months on some things. And that is what kind of caused him to run and avoid me. And to make a really long story short, I thought we were making it work, and I was devastated to find out that not only were we not making it work, but that he had kind of left me hanging to use me, but he had also been seeing someone else during that last 4 months of our relationship, and had recently started a new relationship with someone. And I did not know any of that, but I knew something wasn't right, and I knew I wasn't being treated fairly, and finally told him that we were not going to be able to see each other anymore. And I had just been on a date with him Monday night, and several things happened, and by Friday morning I had called it off. And gosh, I had no idea that he had a date that day. I made it very easy for him, and the hurt that came with the heartbreak after that, and for this last 6 months, there's times when I think this was the Lord laying out consequences for me for my previous sin and my previous heartbreak that I caused in multiple ways. I never lied about the sin that I committed in 2012. And even after that, I was always transparent, even apologizing to the wife of the person that I had had the affair with. And, I don't really know what to say other than I spent all of these years processing this hurt. I have watched my kids face the consequences of divorce. We still deal with that at various times. And all I know is that the Lord loved me through it. The Lord completely forgave me way before I forgave myself. But I did forgive myself at the lake that day with a loaded gun sitting beside me and a 6-pack of beer. I forgave myself that day. And I am so thankful to have been able to accept God's grace and mercy and His forgiveness. But that's not to say that any journey with Christ is easy, and it has not been easy. That's what this podcast is about. This podcast is about heartbreak and the things that Satan will say to you, because Satan still tells me his lies on a daily basis. You're not young enough. You're not pretty enough. You're not wild enough. You're not normal enough. You're stuck up. You're not funny enough. All the things. Satan will say all of these things, and I really believe that he says these things to not just me, but to every person out there, including a lot of women. The one verse that I have clung to all these years, and this is how I want to end this episode, is with Romans 8:28. The Lord works all things together for the good of those who love Him. I love the Lord. I am a sinner. I go to church because that is the hospital for my heart. And I read the Word. And I'm looking forward to sharing other women's stories with you through this communication media. And I just pray that someone out there will be touched by it and maybe realize that you are not alone, that heartbreak comes in all shapes, forms, sizes, but that when we rebrand ourselves in Christ and we give Christ all the glory and we spend our time with Him, we are going to be able to serve our purpose. And one day I am going to be able to be called home to heaven on God's timing, not mine. And I'm going to get to see my childhood best friend again, as well as my dad and all of the other people who were there waiting for me. I'm going to break up with naive, with Satan's lies, because even though it feels like heartbreak, it doesn't have to be heartbreak. It can be a rebrand in Christ. I'm looking forward to sharing stories with you, and thank you so much for following along. Until next time. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Breaking Up with Naive. It's not a heartbreak, it's a rebrand.